It's been a long drive to West Virginia. It's been 20 years since I've been up home to see my Grandma and Grandpa Tusing's farm on top of Branch Mountain. My grandma must have been a mountain mama raising 9 children so far away from everything and surviving the Depression. I wonder what made my Aunts Lynn and Ori stay on the farm. All the other children left once they were grown. I wonder how these 2 women managed to farm the land all by themselves when their parents died. Now my own children are grown, and they have left home. Like one of the designs in Ori and Lynn's quilts, life goes in circles, I suppose. But somehow coming back to West Virginia makes me feel like it was just yesterday when I was a young girl, taking my summer vacations with my mother, father, and brother on my aunt's 200-acre farm. Our journey to reach the top of the mountain took us 4 long hours from Washington, D.C. I knew we had reached the country when the paved road stopped and the road became dirt and gravel. Around each bend, my mom honked the horn to alert an oncoming driver that we were coming around the mountain. Our car had no air conditioning, but we kept the windows rolled up tight. We'd rather endure the stifling heat than choke on the dust. The higher we went, the more I looked for trees, since they were the only things that could save us if we slipped off the road and fell to the bottom of the mountain. When we passed by the old one-room Topsy schoolhouse, where my mom and her brothers and sisters went to school, I knew we were almost at the old home place. When we reached my aunt's lane, we began an unusual ritual. Our car could not make it over the bumpy, rutted dirt road leading to the farm. All of us, except my mom, who was driving, had to get out and walk so the car could not bottom out and could clear the deep ruts made by the pouring rains. Once we reached the metal gate at the end of the lane, I could see the mended pig pen on the hill to my left, the weathered bank barn a few feet away, and the dilapidated chicken coop on my far right. The faded white clapboard farmhouse with a double porch rested quietly in a hollow. I hardly remember my mountaineer grandfather, except that he was a tall man with gray hair, and he liked to rock on the front porch while playing a whistle that he made from a pipe. I've been told stories how he liked to hunt bears. I don't remember my grandmother, since I was only a few months old when she died. Not too far from the house was the necessary outhouse, or Johnny house, that my aunts called it. Although there were no children to play with while we visited my aunts, we never asked any of our suburban friends to join us. We were afraid they might be embarrassed by the country life we temporarily lived. My Aunt Ori was always glad to see me, but she frowned at my short hair, sleeveless top, and the shorts I wore that exposed my bare legs. Ori didn't think my clothes were proper for a girl. Because Ori and Lynn were devout Mennonites, they dressed differently than we did. Their clothes consisted of long-sleeve, collarless blouses, floor-length skirts, heavy skin-tone muslin stockings, and leather boots. They usually wore strapless aprons held up by safety pins. They did not believe in using ornamental buttons or zippers. Scissors had never clipped their hair, and they always wore their hair in a bun, covered with a white net cap. About the only things similar to the 2 sisters were their clothes. Ori was short and stocky with a strong, sharp disposition, while Lynn was tall and thin, meek and mild. I noticed their clothes were faded and patched, but didn't think about it. They were content with what they had, and they were happy. We gathered in the kitchen with everyone pitching in to get supper ready. The massive wood stove was fired up, even though the temperature outside was 90 degrees. Near the wood stove, there was a small built-in cupboard where the few dishes were kept. Ori was busy stringing beans into a cookie sheet, while Lynn was shucking corn into a dishpan held between her knees. My mom was cooking the steak and fried potatoes in the big black skillets. I helped set the table so that I was sure to get the dishes I wanted to use. Ori and Lynn ate their meals out of the soup bowls, while the rest of us used the white plates. Ori and Lynn drank milk with their supper out of plain glass cups. I like to drink my iced tea from the pretty blue fish glasses. As the food was put on the table, there was barely enough room for our dishes. The table was disarrayed with glass jars filled with spoons and mason jars that contained Lynn's apple butter, jellies, and preserves from the fruits that she had picked from the trees, briars, and bushes. Before eating any meal, we all knew to close our eyes, bow our heads, and fold our hands for Ori to say grace. After the Amen, the adults passed around the food. I was selective as to what I was going to eat, helping myself only to the vegetables grown in Ori's and Lynn's garden. I preferred not to eat the meat, since it could have been one of the cows that were on the farm during my last visit. I did not drink the blue-tinged, watery substance Ori and Lynn considered milk. The crudely sliced homemade bread and the block of butter were left untouched by me. I snubbed any food that contained the farm milk. The butter had been churned hundreds of times in a round wooden barrel and was molded by Ori's hands. No one noticed I also turned down the cottage cheese. For most of the day, the cheese had hung in cheesecloth by the kitchen sink, dripping sour milk into a tin pan. For my city palate, I preferred the milk in a plastic jug, boxed margarine, and uniformly cut plastic wrap bread that my mother had brought along from our grocery store. After dinner, it was time to milk the cows. Inside the barn, there were flies, crawling insects, spider webs, and cow pies. I watched where I stepped and tiptoed my way into the feed room. We watched the cows eat and listened to the rhythm of the milk filling the buckets. My aunts milked 3 cows every morning and night. Once, I tried to milk a cow, but my hands smelled afterwards. When Ori's bucket was full, she hobbled over with her cane to the feed room and poured the foam milk into the dented tuna fish cans strewn around the floor. The barn cats were wild, so I was never able to catch a kitty to cuddle. Hanging by the feed door was an old worn harness that once belonged to Old Charlie. Old Charlie was a big, beautiful, chestnut-colored horse. Lynn used to throw a burlap bag on his back and then hoisted my brother and me up for a ride. She slowly walked us around the barnyard. I was never happier, and my brother Eugene couldn't have been more frightened. Doing the dishes was a special social time. After the milking was done, water was heated in the kettle. From the spring, the cold water was mixed with the heated water in 2 dishpans, one for washing and one for rinsing. As the women caught up on the news, my mom washed, Lynn dried, and Ori supervised. At the end of the day, we were all able to gather in the front room to relax. The cold, pot-bellied stove was like an old watchdog curled up in the center of the room. There was a day bed on one side of the room and a hand-me-down couch against the back wall. From the ceiling glared the single naked light bulb. When a moth flew around the light, Eugene and I quickly covered our ears and hollered for a grown-up to kill it. Once, Ori got a moth in her ear, and she could hear it buzzing for days until it finally died. We all had our favorite places in the front room. Ori resided in her cushioned rocking chair, while Lynn relaxed in a black leather chair with wide wooden arms. Over Lynn's chair hung a plaque with words that my aunts lived by. Do nothing you would not like to be doing when Jesus comes. After reading her Bible, Ori rubbed her knees with horse liniment. She had rheumatism that plagued her most of her life, and her wooden cane was always nearby.
2 cards.
Since Ori would not allow television in the house, my father, brother, and I crowded around the couch to play card games of Hearts, Crazy Eights, or Old Maid. Sometimes Lynn would play Old Maid with us and bear the wrath of Ori. Ori thought card playing was the devil's work, and she would never play. Although Lynn usually ended up with the dreaded Old Maid card, she would just laugh. On some evenings, no matter how hard they had worked, Lynn or Ori would spin the wool from the sheep. The steady, pumping sound made by the spinning wheel pedal was comforting while we all read. They twisted and pulled the wool to make one continuous length of yarn. By pushing down on the pedal with her foot, the spinning wheel went round and round. Because of their spinning and weaving, Ori and Lynn were well known. People would come from miles around to see their beautiful coverlets, quilts, and rugs. When the clock struck 10, it was time for everyone to go upstairs to bed. Ori and Lynn each carried a glass jar with a screw-top lid filled with cool spring water from the kitchen. Although they were tired from working, both Ori and Lynn kneeled on the hardwood floor covered with cold linoleum. They solemnly bowed their heads and silently said their prayers.
We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness.
On this particular Sunday morning, there was excitement in the air. A traveling Mennonite minister, the Reverend Harold Elmswater, and his wife Anna Lee were coming to deliver the word. Since my aunts did not own a car, they seldom had a chance to go anywhere, not even to church. This was a special day when the minister came to call. Everyone got dressed in their Sunday best. I had to wear a dress. No shorts allowed on Sunday. My aunts wore dark, speckled purple skirts and blouses, black stockings, black shoes, and black bonnets. The front yard was transformed into a church. Near the concrete wall built by my grandfather, Lynn arranged the folding chairs used only for company. She took the beloved black hymnals from the glass-enclosed bookcase and placed them on the seats of the chairs. When Reverend Elmswater arrived, we had an old-fashioned outside church service and sang familiar songs like The Old Rugged Cross, Amazing Grace, and I Walk in the Garden Alone. I sang my favorite song at the top of my lungs, Bringing in the Sheep, not realizing the grown-ups were singing a different word. Ori and Lynn were good Christians, the minister said. They did fine missionary work without ever leaving the farm. They knitted bandages for lepers and sent their money to preachers to buy Bibles. In old candy boxes, my aunts kept letters from missionaries all over the world, thanking them for their help. After the minister delivered his message, we had a special lunch on the front porch. My aunts even dressed the table in its Sunday best by covering it with a white linen tablecloth. I remember eating the most delicious food that day, including fried chicken, potato salad, cucumber salad with sour cream, the most wonderful strawberry shortcake, and Ori's delightful sugar cookies. On this special day, I decided I didn't care if the food did come from the farm. With the minister gone, there was not much time to relax. Lynn and Ori had to take care of the cows, even on Sunday. With bonnets on and tree branches in our hand to keep away the gnats, Eugene and I went with Lynn to bring in the cows from the big field. We listened to Lynn tell us stories about the relatives we never knew. Our cousin Moses died at the age of 12. He was having fun dancing on the back of a hay wagon when he suddenly fell off. He died a few days later from a broken back. Then there was another cousin, Jenny Bell, who had mistakenly picked poisonous mushrooms and fed them to her children. Jenny, her daughter, and son died from eating those mushrooms. The father, who was away from home, and an infant boy escaped the tragedy. Lynn also showed us where the family's favorite white horse, Gert, was buried. Gert rests peacefully under a huge pile of rocks shaded by 2 maple trees. When a new day dawned, Ori and Lynn would begin their morning routines. Each morning before breakfast, they faithfully read their Bibles, said their prayers, took care of the pigs, the chickens, and the cows, and listened to the local radio program. In my bed, directly above the kitchen, I could hear the melancholy organ music while the solemn, deep-voiced man read the names of those who had died during the night. As soon as the program ended, Ori turned the radio off until the next morning. Around the breakfast table, the morning discussion included who had died during the night and who they were related to. I never really thought about it before, but I realized Ori and Lynn didn't listen to music for fun or sing while they worked. Only when the minister was here would they sing to praise God. After breakfast, my brother and I had several choices. We might follow Lynn to get some water from the spring house, watch Lynn cut wood with an axe, or help her feed the lambs milk from a Pepsi bottle with a nipple on the end. Sometimes Ori made lye soap in a big black kettle heated with firewood in the front yard. After the soap had hardened, Ori cut the soap into squares, and Lynn stored the blocks of soap on top of old newspapers under our beds upstairs. Once, Eugene and I got a piece of soap to carve and had a delightful day, pretending we were pioneers. During the hot afternoons, there wasn't much to do but hoe the garden or pull the weeds. I was not interested in doing either chore because I had to be careful of gnats, bugs, and snakes, so I stayed inside where it was halfway cool. I flipped through religious magazines my aunts always had on hand. Sometimes I would find an interesting story. On the table by Lynn's bed were old McGuffey school readers from the one-room schoolhouse, but I left those unopened. I was on vacation from school and did not want to read something educational. Above me in our bedroom, I could hear a soft, slow, pounding rhythm. I recognized the sound that Lynn was at the large loom making a coverlet. There were hundreds of linen threads on a wooden frame. Lynn whisked a wooden peg through the threads and then pulled on a wooden board to tighten the threads together. Ori taught Lynn how to make the coverlets and rugs on the loom. Their work was so beautiful and intricate that researchers from the Smithsonian Institute came out to West Virginia to see Ori and Lynn's work.
Lynn and Ora's work, of course, when they wove a coverlet, it was perfect. They didn't make mistakes. If they made mistakes, they went back and corrected them. And this little piece is kind of a sampler of overshot coverlet pattern that's called honeycomb. And these are all the different variations that you can have with the same threading on the loom by just changing the pedaling. And of course, I changed the colors. But a little story that when Lynn was in the nursing home and took 30 minutes for her to figure out who I was, I brought her a pillow that was a coverlet pattern. And she looked at it, and she looked at it, and she looked at it, and she says, "There's a mistake." And she didn't hardly know what she was doing anymore because she was basically dying. But the weaving was she learned it so young that she was going back to her early years in her mind. She knew weaving backwards and forwards. She could see I had woven a mistake in that pillow, and she could find it. She found it within about 10 minutes. And I cherish that she was that good at her trade. When I think about Ora, I think about her as kind of the leader at the farm. She was pretty much in charge. And she was kind of peachy and round and fun, and she had a real sense of humor that was, I don't know, just real mountain, sometimes real naughty. And she was always coming out with some kind of a saying for health things, like burdock tea is good for hemorrhoids or whatever. And so I learned a lot of things from her that were not necessarily weaving and spinning. It was about farming and or about mountain life or about animals.
My sister was making cover lids, and we had the loom in the one room upstairs, and this was a glaring flower. That was the main pattern we had at first. And I decided, my mother wanted each one of us to have a cover lid, and there was 9 of us. And so I decided I wanted an orchid-colored one. And I wove about a yard on it, and then my sister Lynn made the rest of it.
Okay, when I think about Lynn, it's amazing, but her mind was very complex. She could do mathematically, figuring out coverlets, how to do it, interpret the patterns, and it's a mathematical process. And she was really a hard worker, and she got her jaw broken one time when a cow kicked her, and so that made her speech kind of different from then on. And she would sit on a stool and just lean up against the cow and milk it. And she was always talking about going up top. That meant they were going to the pasture on top of the mountain to get the cows, that they were up there in the pasture.
She worked at home more than what Ori did. And she took care of the cows and milked the cows and took them to the field and would go after them. And she fed the chickens and gathered the eggs and did the outside work more than what Ori did. Ori was more of inside work.
This is a picture of the house, and Lynn splitting wood. That was hard work, splitting that wood, and she could do it. But that's something I could never do.
Lynn could weave, but she never touched the loom after Ori passed away.
I guess I cherish the camaraderie as much as I do the weaving and spinning knowledge. And I always knew when I was there that I was in an unusual place, that there just wasn't any place like that anywhere anymore. And I really liked that.
We'll all journey home, we'll all We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, then we'll all journey home.
The week had ended, and it was time for us to return home. Ori gave me a kiss rather than her customary hug. She was holding something behind her back. With Lynn by her side, Ori handed me a black book. It was one of their treasured hymnals we used on Sunday. They wanted me to have this since I enjoyed singing the hymns. With a thank you, a quick kiss, and a hug, I said goodbye until next summer and raced to catch up with my family. I did not know that would be the last time I would see Ori. She died of cancer the following year. As I rode back down the mountain, I began thumbing through the hymnal. There was something written on the inside cover. Dear Kathleen, be one of God's sheep, and you will follow in the path of righteousness. Love, Ori and Lynn.
Then we'll all journey home.
On my way home from Lynn's funeral, I realized how much my aunts meant to me. Now, even in death, the two sisters will be together, buried side by side in the family graveyard. Ori's and Lynn's lives were sewn together with threads of simplicity, serenity, and spirituality. They knew that, like a pattern for weaving, life can be complex, but with perseverance and reverence for God, the results can be beautiful. Although Ori and Lynn rarely left the farm on top of Branch Mountain, they touched many lives, near and far, young and old, giving us an appreciation for the texture of life.
We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, in the wilderness, in the wilderness. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, then we'll all journey home. We'll all journey home, we'll all journey home. We'll camp a little while in the wilderness, then we'll all journey home.